A homeless veteran with grease-stained hands stands beside a gleaming corporate helicopter on a small family farm, his worn military jacket contrasting sharply with the expensive suits of the executives surrounding him. Just 72 hours earlier, he had been sheltering in an abandoned barn during a thunderstorm when he heard the desperate sounds of a farmer's tractor breaking down in the adjacent field. Now, as the CEO of America's largest agricultural technology corporation steps forward to shake his hand, he must decide whether to accept a life-changing opportunity that could restore everything he lost or remain loyal to the struggling farming community that showed him kindness when the rest of the world looked away. Before we continue this incredible journey, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's video will reveal an even more extraordinary twist to this remarkable tale. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jack Reeves pulled his weathered canvas backpack higher on his shoulder as the late September rain began to intensify. At 45, the former Marine Corps mechanic had developed an instinct for finding shelter before weather turned truly dangerous, a skill that had served him well during his 4 years of homelessness following his medical discharge and subsequent economic collapse. The darkening clouds and dropping temperature suggested this wasn't a passing shower, but the leading edge of the autumn storm system that local forecasters had been warning about for days. The rural landscape of Crawford County, Pennsylvania, offered fewer sheltering options than the urban environments Jack had navigated in previous years. No underpasses, abandoned buildings, or 24-hour establishments where a quiet, polite veteran might be permitted to linger through bad weather. But what the countryside lacked in conventional refuge, it made up for in its abundance of barns, equipment sheds, and seasonal structures that stood empty much of the year. Half a mile ahead, Jack spotted the distinctive silhouette of an old dairy barn, its red paint long faded to a dull rust color that spoke of years of agricultural decline in the region. The property showed no signs of current activity, no vehicles in the gravel drive, no lights in the farmhouse windows, no livestock in the surrounding pastures. It was the kind of semi-abandoned homestead increasingly common across rural America, where economic pressures had forced multi-generational farming families to surrender their way of life. Jack quickened his pace as the first rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. His left knee, damaged during his third deployment when an IED had flipped his transport vehicle, protested sharply, but he pushed through the familiar pain. The prospect of a dry place to wait out the storm outweighed momentary discomfort. Reaching the barn just as the rain transformed from steady drops to a driving downpour, Jack slipped through a gap in the wooden doors that had warped with age and neglect. The interior smelled of old hay, machine oil, and the distinctive earthiness of a space long used for agricultural purposes. Enough light filtered through the weathered roof boards to reveal a mostly empty space, save for some forgotten equipment pushed against the back wall. Just for the storm, Jack murmured to himself, a habit developed during years of temporary sheltering. He never took advantage of such places. No fires, no damage, no trace left behind when he moved on. Respect for other people's property remained a core value, even when those same people might cross the street to avoid making eye contact with him. Setting his backpack on a relatively clean patch of concrete floor, Jack took inventory of his surroundings more carefully. The barn had clearly been used primarily for equipment storage rather than livestock in its recent past. A partial wall separated one section where an old workbench stood clustered with dusty tools and parts, suggesting a repair area for farm machinery. It brought a faint smile to Jack's weathered face. Mechanics' spaces always felt familiar, almost like home, regardless of what type of equipment they serviced. Jack's own journey into homelessness had begun not with addiction or mental health crises, as many civilians assumed about homeless veterans, but with a perfect storm of medical bills, job loss and divorce following his medical discharge. As a Humvee mechanic with over 15 years of service, he had departed the military with exceptional skills, but also chronic pain, intermittent PTSD symptoms, and a healthcare bureaucracy that seemed designed to exhaust rather than assist veterans. Seeking support, when the manufacturing plant where he'd found post-military employment closed and relocated overseas, the dominoes began to fall rapidly. His marriage, already strained by his deployment-related nightmares and pain management struggles, collapsed. Under the added financial pressure, the house went next, then his savings, then his pickup truck. 4 years later, despite numerous attempts to regain economic stability, Jack had joined America's invisible population, the rural homeless who wandered between small towns, lacking the political visibility of urban homelessness, but suffering the same crushing realities. Settling onto an overturned bucket, Jack reached into his backpack for his most valuable possession, a rugged, waterproof case containing his military certification documents, ID, and specialized tools of the mechanic's trade that he'd refused to pawn even during his most desperate moments. These were not merely instruments for repair work, but tangible connections to the person he had been before circumstance had stripped away his social identity. A skilled professional whose hands could coax temperamental machinery back to life under the most challenging conditions. The rain intensified, drumming against the metal sections of the barn roof in an almost musical rhythm that triggered a memory of monsoon seasons during his deployment to Southeast Asia. Jack closed his eyes, allowing his mind to drift back to a time when he'd had purpose, community, and a defined role in the world. The Marine Corps might have been challenging and dangerous, but it had also provided structure and belonging, qualities his civilian life had conspicuously lacked since his discharge. A sudden crash of thunder, much closer than before, snapped Jack back to the present. The storm was directly overhead now, the kind of violent weather system that could topple trees and flood low-lying areas. Through the steady roar of rainfall, another sound reached him, mechanical, distinctly out of place, and immediately recognizable to his trained ear. An engine struggling, then failing, followed by the metallic protest of machinery being pushed. Beyond its breaking point, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Moving to the barn's side window, Jack peered through sheets of rain to see a tractor in the adjacent field, approximately 200 yards away. Even through the downpour, he could discern black smoke mixing with the steam rising from its engine compartment, a sure sign of serious mechanical distress. More concerning was the figure hunched over the controls, still trying to coax movement from the clearly disabled machine as lightning flashed dangerously close. "Damn fool's gonna get himself electrocuted," Jack muttered, already reaching for his jacket. Years of military service had instilled a reflexive response to potential emergency situations that overrode personal comfort or safety considerations. Despite having no connection to the farmer or obligation to assist, Jack found himself heading back into the storm, his mechanic's instincts and ingrained sense of duty guiding his actions. The rain was coming down with such intensity that Jack was soaked through before he'd made it halfway to the disabled tractor. The field had already begun to transform into a muddy quagmire, each step requiring significant effort as his boots sank and stuck in the increasingly waterlogged soil. His knee throbbed with renewed intensity, but he pushed forward, recognizing the growing danger as the storm intensified. As he drew closer, Jack could see that the tractor was an older John Deere model, probably from the early 2000s. Sturdy equipment, but showing signs of the extended use and minimal maintenance that characterized machinery on struggling family farms. The operator, still unaware of Jack's approach, continued wrestling with the controls while occasionally slamming a frustrated hand against the dashboard. "Hey!" Jack called out, raising his voice to be heard over the combined roar of rain and thunder. "You need to shut it down. That smoke's not just water hitting a hot engine." The figure turned, revealing a woman in her early 30s, her expression shifting from surprise to wariness at the unexpected appearance of a stranger in the middle of a storm. Her hesitation was brief, however, quickly replaced by the pragmatic acceptance often found in farming communities, where emergencies frequently necessitated assistance from whatever quarter it appeared. "Engine seized up completely," she shouted back, gesturing toward the smoking compartment. "I was trying to get the last section harvested before the storm wiped out the entire crop." Jack reached the tractor and quickly assessed the situation. With practiced efficiency, "You need to get clear of this metal death trap with all this lightning," he advised, gesturing toward the smoking engine. "Whatever's wrong, it's not getting fixed in a thunderstorm, and that's looking like it could be an electrical fire starting." The woman's reluctance was visible. Abandoning the harvest meant potential financial catastrophe. But the wisdom of Jack's warning was underscored by another crack of lightning that struck a tree line barely 100 yards distant. With obvious frustration, she climbed down from the operator's seat, revealing mud-spattered work clothes and the physical resilience common to those who worked the land for a living. "Dad's going to lose his mind," she said, pushing wet hair back from her face. "This field was supposed to pay the property tax bill coming due next week." "Let's worry about staying alive first," Jack replied, already turning toward the nearest structure, a small equipment shed at the field's edge. "We can assess the damage once the storm passes." They barely reached the relative safety of the metal-roofed wooden shed before the heavens truly opened, transforming the steady downpour into a virtual wall of water. The small space, filled with smaller farm implements and supplies, offered protection from the rain, but amplified the sound of the storm to near-deafening levels. "I'm Emma Whitaker," the woman offered, once they could hear each other without shouting. Her quick, assessing gaze took in Jack's worn clothing, military-style backpack, and the general appearance of someone who hadn't had regular access to conventional living facilities. To her credit, her expression remained neutral, without the pity or suspicion that Jack had grown accustomed to encountering. "That's my dad's farm you were sheltering on, the old Wilson place." "Jack Reeves," he replied simply, "former Marine Corps mechanic. I was just passing through when the storm hit, saw your tractor situation and thought I might be able to help." Emma's expression shifted from neutral to cautious interest. "You work on agricultural equipment?" "Military vehicles primarily, but engines are engines," Jack answered with the quiet confidence of someone who had mastered the fundamental principles of mechanical systems rather than merely specific applications. "I've worked on enough equipment to know that your tractor has either thrown a rod or suffered catastrophic cooling system failure. Either way, not something you want to be sitting on during an electrical storm." Emma studied him with the careful consideration of someone accustomed to making quick assessments of both people and situations. Rural America had seen its share of transient populations in recent years, some bringing trouble, others simply seeking work or passage. Jack recognized her mental calculation, weighing potential risk against potential assistance. "Our regular mechanic retired last year," she said finally. "The nearest service center is in Lancaster, and they're booked 3 weeks out minimum, even if we could afford their rates." Jack nodded, understanding both the explicit information and the unspoken context. Small family farms operated on such razor-thin margins that equipment failures often represented existential threats rather than mere inconveniences. The urgency of the harvest wasn't simply about scheduling, but economic survival. "Once the storm passes, I'd be happy to take a look," he offered. "Can't make promises without seeing what's actually happening inside that engine compartment, but I might be able to at least give you a clearer picture of what you're dealing with." Emma's response was interrupted by the shed door bursting open, revealing an older man in his 60s, rain-soaked and scowling with a mixture of concern and irritation. His weathered face, deeply lined from decades of outdoor work, bore the distinctive coloration of someone who had spent a lifetime in the fields, permanently ruddy across the forehead and cheeks, with paler skin around the eyes where sunglasses had offered modest protection. Emma saw the tractor from the house window. He stopped abruptly upon noticing Jack, his expression immediately hardening with paternal protectiveness. "Who's this?" "Dad, this is Jack Reeves," Emma replied, with the patient tone of someone accustomed to managing her father's reactions. "He's a mechanic who offered to help with the tractor, Marine Corps trained." The mention of military service visibly altered the older man's demeanor. His posture relaxed slightly as he extended a calloused hand. "Frank Whitaker, served Army myself, though that was Vietnam era. You caught in this deluge, passing through?" "Yes, sir," Jack confirmed, shaking the offered hand. "Was sheltering in the old barn up the road when I heard your tractor having issues." Frank's assessment was quicker and less guarded than his. Daughters had been the shared background of military service, creating an immediate foundation of basic trust that transcended Jack's current circumstances. The older farmer nodded once, decisively. "Well, no sense standing around in this shed while we get flooded out. House is just up the drive. We can wait out the storm there, get some hot coffee in you, and then see about that tractor when the weather breaks." The invitation to enter their home represented a significant gesture of trust, particularly in rural communities where property boundaries often defined more than just land ownership, but personal security as well. Jack recognized both the kindness and the evaluation inherent in the offer, a chance for the Whitakers to better assess him in a controlled environment while also acknowledging his potential value in addressing their equipment crisis. "I appreciate that, sir," Jack replied, conscious of maintaining the respectful address that resonated with older veterans. "If you're sure it's no imposition." "Wouldn't offer if it was," Frank stated flatly, already turning toward the door. "Besides Maria, that's my wife, would have my hide if she found out I left anyone out in this mess, let alone another veteran." The Whitaker farmhouse stood approximately 400 yards from the equipment shed, a modest two-story structure that had clearly been expanded and modified over generations of family ownership. The white clapboard exterior had faded to a soft grey, with a wraparound porch supporting a collection of well-worn rocking chairs and potted plants. It emanated the particular character of homes that had witnessed multiple generations passing through, not fancy or updated to current trends, but solid, functional, and imbued with the authentic history of lives actually lived, rather than decorative nostalgia. By the time they reached the covered porch, all three were thoroughly soaked, despite their brief dash through the downpour. Frank led them through the front door into a warmly lit kitchen where a woman in her early 60s was already moving, toward them with armfuls of towels, clearly having observed their approach through the window. "Land's sake, Frank, you're all drenched to the bone," she exclaimed, distributing towels with efficient movements before pausing momentarily upon noticing Jack. Like her husband, her assessment was quick but thorough. "Maria, this is Jack Reeves, former marine mechanic," Frank explained, already toweling his thinning grey hair. "Found him helping Emma with the tractor. Thought he might be able to take a look at it once this weather passes." Maria Whitaker's expression softened immediately at this introduction, her natural hospitality overriding any potential concerns about inviting a stranger into their home. "Well, you'll catch pneumonia in those wet clothes. Frank, get him something." Dry to wear. Emma, there's coffee ready and stew on the stove. You all need warming up. Before Jack could politely decline what felt like excessive generosity, he found himself shepherded toward a small bathroom off the kitchen with an armful of clean, if well-worn clothing and firm instructions to change immediately. The Whitakers, matter-of-fact assistance offered without hesitation or apparent expectation of anything in return, caught him off guard. During his years of homelessness, he had grown accustomed to being either invisible or treated with suspicious caution. This straightforward acceptance felt almost disorienting in its normalcy. When Jack emerged a few minutes later, wearing Frank's spare flannel shirt and denim work pants, both slightly short but otherwise adequate, the kitchen table had been set for four, with steaming bowls of beef stew and fresh bread already in place. The domestic scene, ordinary for the Whitakers, but extraordinary in Jack's recent experience, created a sudden tightness in his throat that he mastered with the discipline of someone long practiced at controlling emotional responses. "Sit, eat," Maria directed, indicating an empty chair. "No point in discussing tractors or anything else on an empty stomach." The meal passed with the comfortable conversation of people well-versed in integrating newcomers into their home. The Whitakers asked questions about Jack's military service and mechanical background without probing into the circumstances that had led to his current situation. Jack offered information about his deployments and technical expertise while carefully navigating around the more difficult aspects of his post-military life. Emma primarily observed, occasionally contributing details about the farm's operations and challenges, but largely allowing her parents to lead the interaction. As they finished eating, Frank finally addressed the immediate practical concern. "So, about that tractor. It's a 2003 John Deere 7920. Been having cooling system problems all season, but we've been nursing it along since we can't afford the authorized service center rates." Jack nodded, his mind already processing the specific model information and likely failure points. The smoking suggests it might have finally overheated completely. Could be a blown head gasket, cracked block, or several other possibilities. Won't know for sure until I can get a proper look. "And what would you charge for that assessment?" Frank asked directly, the question reflecting both the straightforward approach of farming communities and the economic realities they faced. Jack considered for a moment. Standard mechanic rates would be around $8,500 per hour in this region, but he was acutely aware of both the Whitakers' likely financial constraints and his own unconventional situation. "I'm not looking to charge anything for just taking a look," he said finally. "If it's something I can fix and you want me to handle it, we could discuss fair compensation then, maybe a place to set up my tent for a few days during the work." Frank and Maria exchanged a quick glance that contained an entire conversation, the silent communication of couples who have moved through decades together. Maria gave a nearly imperceptible nod before Frank turned back to Jack. "We've got a room above the garage that used to be our son's before he moved to Pittsburgh," Frank stated. "Nothing fancy, but it's got a bed and a space heater. You're welcome to it while you look at our equipment. No need for tents." Before Jack could formulate a response to this unexpected offer, Emma spoke up for the first time since they'd sat down to eat. "Dad, if he's going to help with the tractor, maybe he could look at the irrigation pump too, and the backup generator. Both have been acting up." The cascade of potential repair work reflected the reality of struggling family farms. Regular maintenance deferred due to financial constraints until multiple systems approached simultaneous failure points. Jack recognized the situation from his own military experience, where equipment was often pushed well beyond recommended service intervals during deployment, creating cascading mechanical issues. "I'd be happy to assess whatever needs attention," Jack offered, careful not to overcommit without proper diagnostic work, though I should mention that my specialty is engines and drive systems rather than electrical components. Honestly, any help would be welcome, Frank admitted, with the reluctant candor of someone unaccustomed to acknowledging vulnerability. We've been patching things together ourselves since Cal Harris retired. Between equipment costs rising, seed prices, and the mega farms undercutting our contracts, there just isn't room in the budget for professional mechanics anymore. The situation described was painfully familiar to Jack, the same economic pressures that had transformed the American manufacturing sector had also reshaped agriculture, squeezing family operations between rising costs and falling prices, until many simply surrendered to corporate acquisition. He had witnessed similar patterns in countless small towns during his years of transient existence. "Well, let's start with the tractor," Jack suggested practically. "Once the storm passes, I can take a proper look and give you a clearer picture of what you're facing." As if responding to their conversation, the intensity of the rain began to diminish, the thunderous downpour gradually transitioning to a steady but less violent rainfall. The immediate crisis of the storm was passing, but Jack sensed that the Whitakers faced longer-term challenges that no temporary break in the weather could resolve. Maria rose to clear the dishes, waving off Jack's attempt to assist. "You men go see about that tractor. Emma can help me here." The dismissal was good-natured but firm, reflecting the traditional division of labor that still characterized many farming households despite broader societal changes. Emma rolled her eyes slightly, but complied, beginning to gather plates with practiced efficiency. Outside, the farm presented a landscape transformed by the recent deluge. Fields glistened with standing water, and small rivulets had formed along the tractor paths between growing areas. The sky remained heavily overcast, but the immediate threat of lightning had passed, making it safe to approach the disabled equipment. Jack followed Frank toward the field where the tractor stood abandoned, both men picking their way carefully through mud that sucked at their boots with each step. The scene embodied the constant battle farmers waged against elements beyond their control: weather, market forces, corporate pressure, all threatening the delicate balance required for agricultural survival. As they approached the John Deere, Jack could see that the smoke had dissipated, but the acrid smell of burned oil and coolant still lingered around the machine. Even before opening the engine compartment, his experienced senses were cataloging information, narrowing down potential causes based on subtle cues that would be invisible to most observers. "Let's see what we're dealing with," Jack said, reaching for the release latches that would allow access to the tractor's internal components. As the heavy metal hood swung upward, he was already preparing himself for what was likely to be significant damage, the kind that often represented a death sentence for equipment on financially strapped operations like the Whitaker farm. What? He couldn't possibly know. As he leaned forward to begin his assessment of the disabled machinery, was that this simple act of mechanical diagnosis would set in motion a chain of events that would eventually bring a corporate helicopter to this modest Pennsylvania farm. Within 72 hours, the homeless veteran with grease-stained hands would find himself face-to-face with decisions that would not only potentially transform his own circumstances, but possibly alter the future of an entire community fighting to preserve its way of life against seemingly insurmountable odds. As the fading daylight caught the metal surfaces of the disabled tractor, Jack noted the subtle signs of a machine that had been meticulously maintained despite its age. Evidence of Frank Whitaker's commitment to preserving his livelihood through sheer determination and ingenuity when financial resources fell short. It reminded Jack of his own unit's equipment in Afghanistan, kept operational through creativity and persistence when supply chains failed to deliver needed parts. The parallel strengthened his resolve to provide whatever assistance he could. To the family that had offered him kindness without hesitation or judgment, a rarity in his experience of the past 4 years. With methodical precision, Jack began to examine the engine components, his hands moving with the confident familiarity of someone reconnecting with a fundamental part of their identity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, in this moment, he was not defined by homelessness or displacement, but by the skilled expertise that no circumstance had been able to take from him. As Frank watched with hopeful anticipation, Jack immersed himself in the diagnostic process, unaware that this routine mechanical assessment would ultimately lead to consequences neither man could possibly anticipate. Emma's response was interrupted by the shed door bursting open, revealing an older man in his 60s, rain-soaked and scowling with a mixture of concern and irritation. His weathered face, deeply lined from decades of outdoor work, bore the distinctive coloration of someone who had spent a lifetime in the fields. Permanently ruddy across the forehead and cheeks, with paler skin around the eyes where sunglasses had offered modest protection. "Emma!" saw the tractor from the house window. He stopped abruptly upon noticing Jack, his expression immediately hardening with paternal protectiveness. "Who's this?" "Dad, this is Jack Reeves," Emma replied with the patient tone of someone accustomed to managing her father's reactions. "He's a mechanic who offered to help with the tractor, Marine Corps trained." The mention of military service visibly altered the older man's demeanor. His posture relaxed slightly as he extended a calloused hand. "Frank Whitaker, served Army myself, though that was Vietnam era. You caught in this deluge passing through?" "Yes, sir," Jack confirmed, shaking the offered hand. "Was sheltering in the old barn up the road when I heard your tractor having issues." The three of them made their way back to the Whitaker farmhouse, where Jack was introduced to Emma's mother, Maria. After changing into dry clothes and sharing a hearty meal, Jack found himself explaining his assessment of their disabled tractor. "From what I could see, it looks like you've got a blown head gasket at minimum," Jack explained as Maria refilled his coffee cup. "Might be worse. Cracked block or damaged cylinders. Won't know for sure until I can get in there properly." Frank nodded grimly, the diagnosis confirming his worst fears. "That tractor's the backbone of our operation. Without it running for harvest." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone at the table understood the implications. For small family farms operating on razor-thin margins, a major equipment failure during harvest season could mean financial ruin. "I'll take a closer look first thing tomorrow," Jack offered. "If it's just the head gasket, that's something I can fix with the right parts." "We'd be grateful for any help," Frank said, the admission clearly difficult for the proud farmer. "Can't offer much in payment beyond room and board while you're working on it." "No, that's more than fair," Jack replied, the prospect of a roof over his head and regular meals representing extraordinary luxury compared to his recent living conditions. As evening settled over the farm, Jack was shown to a small but comfortable room above the detached garage. The space had clearly once belonged to a son or daughter, with faded posters still on the walls and a bookshelf filled with agricultural textbooks and science fiction novels. A proper bed with clean sheets, something Jack hadn't experienced in nearly 8 months, felt almost disorienting in its normalcy. Sitting on the edge of the mattress, Jack pulled out his small toolkit and carefully arranged his precision instruments on the nightstand. The familiar ritual centered him, connecting him to the identity that had been partially submerged during his years of homelessness, but never fully abandoned. Tomorrow, he would be doing what he was trained for, what he excelled at, bringing mechanical systems back to life when others had given up hope. Morning arrived with the distinctive sounds of a working farm, machinery rumbling to life, animals being tended, the rhythmic metallic clang of tools against equipment. Jack woke before dawn, his body still attuned to military schedules, despite years of civilian life. After a quick wash at the small sink in his room, he headed downstairs, eager to begin work on the tractor. The kitchen already bustled with activity, as Maria prepared breakfast while Frank and Emma discussed the day's priorities around the worn oak table. Their conversation halted briefly as Jack entered, then resumed with his natural inclusion, as if he had always been part of their morning routine. "Weather report says clear skies today," Frank informed him over eggs and coffee. "Should give you good conditions to work on that John Deere. I've pulled the service manual from our files," Emma added, sliding a grease-stained technical document across the table. "Not sure how useful it'll be. Pages are missing where we needed them." Most often, Jack accepted the manual with appreciation. Even incomplete, manufacturer documentation could save valuable diagnostic time. "This helps. I'll head out as soon as we're done eating." The disabled tractor waited in the field where it had been, abandoned during the storm, its green paint now spattered with mud and its engine compartment showing evidence of catastrophic failure. Jack circled the machine methodically, his trained eye noting details that would escape most observers. Fluid patterns that told stories of when and how systems had failed, wear patterns that revealed operational history, maintenance attempts that had addressed symptoms rather than root causes. For the next several hours, Jack immersed himself completely in the diagnostic process, methodically dismantling the engine components to reach the heart of the failure. The work was physically demanding, requiring strength to manipulate heavy parts and delicate precision for internal components, but the familiar mechanical challenge felt almost therapeutic after years of underemployment. Midway through the morning, Emma appeared with a thermos of coffee and stood watching his progress. "Any verdict yet?" she asked, handing him the thermos. Jack wiped grease from his hands before accepting the coffee. "It's not good news," he admitted. "The head gasket is blown, which I expected, but there's also a crack in the engine block. That's a major repair, possibly requiring a full engine replacement, depending on how extensive the damage is." Emma's expression fell, the implications immediately clear. Dad was afraid of that. A new engine would cost more than the entire farm brought in last season. "There might be another option," Jack said carefully, not wanting to offer false hope. "Depending on the location and severity of the crack, there are specialized welding techniques that might work. I used similar approaches in Afghanistan when replacement parts weren't available. It's not the manufacturer's recommended solution, but it could potentially get you through harvest season." "You could do that?" Emma asked, hope cautiously returning to her voice. "I'd need proper welding equipment, some specialized materials, and it would take time with no guarantees," Jack cautioned. "But yes, it's possible." Emma's response was immediate and decisive. "I'll talk to Dad about getting whatever you need. If there's even a chance of saving this harvest, we have to try." By lunchtime, Frank had made arrangements to borrow welding equipment from a neighboring farm, and Emma had driven to the nearest agricultural supply store for the specialized materials Jack had listed. The family's swift mobilization of resources within their community spoke to the resilience and interdependence that characterized rural life, networks of mutual support that persisted despite economic pressures threatening their collective way of life. As Jack continued his methodical disassembly of the damaged engine, Frank returned from retrieving the welding equipment. The older farmer set down the gear and stood watching Jack work for several minutes before speaking. "Emma tells me you learned these repair techniques in Afghanistan," he said finally. Jack nodded, without looking up from the intricate component he was carefully extracting. "Third deployment. We were stationed at a forward operating base that didn't get regular supply runs. When equipment broke down, we either fixed it with what we had or went without. Improvise, adapt, overcome," Frank commented, quoting the unofficial Marine Corps mantra. This drew Jack's attention up from his work, a flash of recognition crossing his features. "You know the core sayings?" "My younger brother was a Marine," Frank explained. "Vietnam like me, but different branch. He used to say that all the time." A shadow crossed his weathered face. "Lost him in '68, Khe Sanh." Jack set down his tools and straightened, offering the respect of his full attention for this revelation. "I'm sorry, sir. Khe Sanh was brutal." Frank nodded, acknowledging both the condolence and the understanding behind it, the particular bond that exists between those who have served, regardless of generation or specific conflict. "Sometimes I think about how he'd handle what's happening to farms like ours now. Different kind of battle, but still fighting for survival." The parallel wasn't lost on Jack, who had witnessed similar struggles playing out across rural America. During his years on the road, the economic forces displacing small farmers resembled asymmetric warfare in certain respects. Opponents with vastly superior resources wearing down resistance through sustained pressure rather than direct confrontation. "Your brother would probably approach it the same way he did in Vietnam," Jack suggested. "One day at a time, using whatever resources are available, protecting what matters most." Frank considered this, then gestured toward the disassembled tractor. "And right now, that means getting this equipment running again." "Yes, sir, it does," Jack confirmed, turning back to his work with renewed focus. The afternoon progressed with methodical intensity as Jack prepared the damaged engine block for the specialized welding process. When Emma returned with the materials he'd requested, the three of them worked together, Jack handling the technical aspects, Frank managing the welding equipment, and Emma organizing tools and components to maintain efficiency in the makeshift outdoor repair shop they'd established. As sunset approached, Jack finally stepped back from the partially reassembled engine, wiping sweat and grime from his forehead. "That's as far as we can go today," he announced. "The welded sections need to cure overnight before we continue reassembly." "Will it work?" Frank asked directly, the question containing all the anxiety of a farmer whose livelihood hung in the balance. "Can't make promises," Jack replied honestly. "This kind of repair, it's not in any manual, but I've seen worse damage restored to working condition when the need was great enough." That evening, dinner conversation revolved around the broader challenges facing the Whitaker farm. Not just the immediate crisis of the disabled tractor, but the systematic pressures threatening their entire way of life. Jack listened more than he spoke, absorbing the complex reality of modern American agriculture through the family's lived experience. "It's the consolidation that's killing us," Frank explained, between bites of Maria's homemade stew. 20 years ago, there were 40 independent family farms in this county. Now there are 8, and Agritech Corporation owns everything else. They offer partnerships that are really just slow-motion acquisitions, Emma added, her academic understanding complementing her father's practical knowledge. She had studied agricultural economics before returning to help save the family farm when Frank's health began declining. Farmers signed contracts for seed, equipment and technical support that gradually transfer all decision-making power to the corporation while leaving all the risk with the farmer. "And they've been after our land for 3 years now," Maria contributed, her typically gentle demeanor hardening slightly. "Keep raising their offer every time something breaks down or a harvest comes in below expectations." Jack recognized the pattern from similar stories he'd heard in farming communities across the Midwest and Plains states. Corporate agricultural entities had refined their acquisition strategies to capitalize on the vulnerability of independent operators, creating conditions that made surrender seem inevitable. "What makes your property so attractive to them?" he asked, curious about the specific dynamics at play in this situation. Frank and Emma exchanged glances before Emma answered. "We control the headwaters of Elk Creek, which irrigates about 30% of the county's farmland. Whoever owns our property essentially controls water access for the entire Eastern Valley. It's not just about adding acreage to their holdings, Frank continued. It's about controlling a critical resource that gives them leverage over every remaining independent operation in the region. The strategic dimension added another layer to Jack's understanding of the Whitakers' struggle. Their resistance wasn't merely about preserving their own livelihood, but protecting the viability of an entire community of independent farmers. The stakes extended far beyond a single broken tractor or challenging harvest season. As the evening wound down and the family prepared for bed, Frank paused at the bottom of the stairs, turning back to Jack with an expression of gruff sincerity. "Wanted to say, we appreciate what you're doing. Whether that tractor runs again or not, the fact that you're willing to try means something." Coming from a man of Frank's generation and temperament, the statement represented significant emotional disclosure. Jack nodded, acknowledging both the gratitude and the dignity behind it. "Get some rest, sir. Tomorrow's going to be another long day." Later, alone in the room above the garage, Jack found himself contemplating the unexpected turn his journey had taken. 3 days ago, he had been anonymous and isolated, moving through the world without connections or purpose beyond daily survival. Now he was embedded, however temporarily, in the struggle of a family, fighting to preserve not just their livelihood, but a way of life increasingly endangered in modern America. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. The sense of purpose and community felt like stepping back into the light after years in shadow, yet Jack knew from bitter experience how quickly such connections could be severed by circumstance. Attachment meant vulnerability, a lesson his post-military life had taught repeatedly. Dawn arrived with renewed focus as Jack returned to the tractor, inspecting the welded repairs that had cured overnight. The precision work appeared to have held, though the true test would come under the pressure and heat of a working engine. With methodical care, he began reassembling the complex system, each component requiring exact placement and calibration. Emma joined him mid-morning, bringing tools from the workshop that might expedite certain aspects of the reassembly. Her own mechanical knowledge, while not professionally trained, reflected the practical education of someone who had grown up maintaining farm equipment out of necessity. "Dad's on the phone with the bank," she explained, as she handed Jack a specialized wrench for the cylinder head bolts. "Trying to negotiate an extension on our equipment loan payment." Jack nodded, understanding the precarious financial balancing act that characterized most family farming operations. Every repair represented not just a technical challenge, but an economic calculation, resources invested versus potential return, all measured against looming payment deadlines. "How's it looking?" Emma asked, nodding toward the partially reassembled engine. "Better than I initially expected," Jack admitted. "The welded section seems solid. Still can't make promises, but I'm cautiously optimistic we can get it running again." They worked together through the morning, conversation flowing naturally between technical matters and personal history. Emma explained her journey from university to reluctant return to the struggling family farm. Jack shared carefully edited versions of his military service and mechanical training, navigating around the more difficult aspects of his post-discharge experience. By early afternoon, the tractor engine had been fully reassembled, fluid systems recharged, and preparations made for the critical moment of truth, the initial start attempt that would reveal whether Jack's unconventional repair approach had succeeded. Frank and Maria joined them in the field. The entire family gathered around the machine that represented either continued independence or potential financial catastrophe. "Moment of truth," Jack said, climbing into the operator's seat. "Stay clear in case something goes wrong." The family stepped back, maintaining hopeful but anxious expressions as Jack turned the ignition key. The starter motor engaged with a healthy mechanical whine, turning the engine over once, twice, 3 times, and then, with a cough of black smoke that quickly cleared, the diesel engine rumbled to life, settling into the steady, rhythmic vibration of proper operation. Frank's face transformed instantly, years of worry momentarily erased by the sound of functioning equipment. Emma clasped her hands together in a gesture of profound relief, while Maria closed her eyes briefly in what appeared to be silent thanksgiving. Jack monitored the gauges carefully, watching for any signs of malfunction as the engine warmed up. After several minutes of observation, he finally allowed himself a cautious smile. Temperature's holding steady. Oil pressure looks good. I think we've got a working tractor again. The celebration that followed was subdued by outside standards, but profound in context. Frank clapping Jack firmly on the shoulder, Emma performing an impromptu dance step, Maria declaring that a special dinner was in order. For a family that had faced a potential extinction-level threat to their livelihood, the repaired tractor represented far more than restored machinery. It symbolized continued independence and the possibility of survival against overwhelming odds. "I'll need to monitor it closely during the first few hours of operation," Jack cautioned, unwilling to declare complete victory until the repair had proven itself under working conditions. "But I think you'll be able to finish your harvest." "We can't thank you enough," Frank said, the gruff farmer momentarily struggling for adequate words. "What you've done here, it's not just fixing a piece of equipment, it's giving us a fighting chance." Jack nodded, uncomfortable with the emotional weight of the moment but understanding its significance. "Glad I could help. Sometimes the right skills in the right place can make all the difference." "Will you stay through harvest?" Emma asked directly, her practical nature evident even in the midst of celebration. "We could use the extra hands, and it would let you monitor the repair while it's under load." The invitation presented Jack with an unexpected crossroads. His pattern for years had been transient assistance followed by departure before connections became too established or expectations too defined. Remaining through harvest would mean committing to weeks rather than days, becoming truly invested in the Whitakers' struggle rather than merely passing through their lives. Before he could formulate a response, a distinctive sound cut through the ambient farm noise, the distant but unmistakable approach of helicopter rotors. All 4 turned toward the source, watching as a sleek black helicopter appeared over the tree line to the east, moving purposefully in their direction. "That's not medical or law enforcement," Jack observed, his military experience immediately categorizing the aircraft by its profile and flight characteristics. "Looks like corporate transport." Frank's expression darkened, the brief joy of the repaired tractor giving way to wary suspicion. "Agri-tech," he stated flatly. "Has to be. They're the only ones who'd come by helicopter around here." The aircraft circled once before settling into a descent pattern toward an open area approximately 100 yards from where they stood. Its glossy black exterior bore no visible markings, but the expensive, executive-class design spoke of significant corporate resources behind its deployment. "What do they want now?" Maria asked, anxiety evident in her voice. "We already told their representatives we're not selling." "I expect we're about to find out," Frank replied grimly, his posture straightening as if preparing for confrontation. As the helicopter settled onto the ground, its rotors slowing, but not fully stopping, the side door slid open to reveal 3 figures in business attire. The central figure, a woman in her 50s wearing a tailored charcoal suit, emerged first, followed by 2 younger men carrying tablets and briefcases. "Diane Winters," Emma identified the woman for Jack's benefit, her voice low. "Agritech's Regional Acquisition Director. She's personally handled their last 5 farm purchases in the county." Jack watched the approaching corporate representatives with the trained assessment of someone who had evaluated potential threats in combat zones. The group moved with the confident purpose of individuals accustomed to wielding significant power and encountering minimal resistance. Their appearance minutes after the tractor's successful repair could not be coincidental, suggesting surveillance or information networks monitoring the Whitaker farm situation. As the corporate delegation drew closer, Jack instinctively stepped slightly back, his years of homeless invisibility creating an automatic response to figures of authority and power. Frank, however, moved forward to meet them, his weathered, farmer's frame standing in stark contrast to the pristine business attire of the approaching executives. "Mr. Whitaker," the woman greeted with professional warmth that didn't reach her eyes. "I was in the area for another matter and thought I'd stop by personally to discuss our updated offer for your property." "Nothing to discuss, Ms. Winters," Frank replied evenly. "As we've told your company repeatedly, our farm is not for sale." The executive's smile remained fixed as her gaze moved past Frank to the recently repaired tractor, then to Jack standing beside it, taking in his work, clothes and hands still bearing evidence of mechanical labor. Something in her assessment changed, a recalculation occurring behind her professional facade. "I understand your attachment to the property, Mr. Whitaker," she continued smoothly. "Family legacy carries significant emotional weight. However, current market conditions and the challenges facing independent operators make our offer particularly advantageous at this moment." Emma stepped forward to stand beside her father, her academic knowledge balancing his practical experience. "We're well aware of market conditions, Ms. Winters. We're also aware that Agritech has been purchasing water rights throughout the county at accelerated rates while simultaneously lobbying the state legislature to reduce groundwater access for non-corporate agricultural entities. The slight narrowing of the executive's eyes confirmed the accuracy of Emma's assessment. "Policy adaptations are necessary for modern agricultural efficiency, Ms. Whitaker. The era of scattered independent operations with inconsistent production standards is giving way to more systematic approaches. It's simply evolution. Funny kind of evolution, when the same corporation controls the seed, the equipment, the water, and eventually the land," Frank observed dryly. "Seems more like consolidation than natural selection to me." The conversation had the rhythm of a long-established conflict, positions staked out and defended through multiple previous encounters. Jack observed the dynamic with the heightened awareness of someone who had navigated similar power imbalances from positions of vulnerability, recognizing the subtle psychological warfare underlying the ostensibly civil business discussion. What he couldn't possibly anticipate was how his simple act of mechanical assistance had already altered the trajectory of this ongoing struggle, or how the corporate helicopter currently resting on Whitaker farmland would soon be joined by a much larger aircraft carrying someone whose arrival would transform not just the family's fight for survival, but Jack's own uncertain future. As the corporate representatives returned to their helicopter, unsuccessful yet again in their acquisition attempt, Jack found himself wondering about the forces that had brought him to this particular farm at this specific moment. The supposedly random path that had led a homeless veteran to arrive precisely when his specialized skills could make a crucial difference suddenly seemed less like coincidence and more like purpose, a possibility that both comforted and unsettled a man who had grown accustomed to seeing himself as disconnected from any larger narrative. When Frank turned to him after the helicopter's departure and repeated Emma's question about staying through harvest, Jack found himself nodding agreement before he had consciously reached a decision. Something about this family's struggle against overwhelming odds resonated with his own experience of systems too powerful for individuals to challenge alone. and awakened a sense of solidarity he had believed long extinguished by years of isolated survival. "I'll stay," he said simply, committing himself to a course whose consequences he could not possibly foresee. "Someone should keep an eye on that engine until we're sure the repair will hold." Dawn broke with golden light streaming across the Whitaker farm, illuminating dew-covered fields waiting to be harvested. Jack had risen before sunrise, driven by the urgency of completing the tractor repair. Today would determine whether his unconventional welding solution had succeeded, or if the family would face financial catastrophe as their harvest rotted in the fields. The methodical work of reassembling the engine required both physical strength and precision. Each component had to be perfectly aligned, each connection torqued to exact specifications. Jack lost himself in the familiar rhythm of mechanical restoration, his mind focused entirely on the task at hand rather than the uncertainties that had defined his existence for the past 4 years. By mid-morning, Frank and Emma had joined him, creating an assembly line of sorts. Frank handed tools and components as needed, while Emma documented the process, creating a maintenance guide for future reference. The collaborative effort reminded Jack of his military unit, specialized skills coming together toward a common objective, each person contributing their unique strengths. "Almost ready for the moment of truth," Jack announced after securing the final connection. He straightened from his hunched position over the engine compartment, stretching muscles that had been locked in concentration for hours. "Time to see if this repair holds." The three of them stepped back as Jack climbed into the operator's seat. His hand hovered momentarily over the ignition, a silent prayer forming in his mind. Not for himself, but for the family, whose future hinged on this moment. With a deep breath, he turned the key. The starter motor engaged with a mechanical whine, turning the massive engine over once, twice, 3 times. And then, with a cough of black smoke that quickly cleared, the diesel engine rumbled to life. The vibration settled into the steady rhythm of proper operation, gauges registering normal pressure and temperature ranges. Jack monitored every indicator with focused attention, looking for any sign that the repair might fail. After 5 minutes of flawless operation, he finally allowed himself a smile. "I think we've got it," he called over the engine noise. "Temperatures holding steady, oil pressures good." Frank's weathered face transformed, years of worry momentarily erased by the sound of functioning equipment. Emma released a cheer. That was half laugh, half sob of relief. The successful repair represented far more than restored machinery. It symbolized continued independence, a fighting chance against the corporate forces working to eliminate family farms like theirs. "You've done the impossible," Frank declared, clapping Jack firmly on the shoulder after he shut down the engine. "That repair would have cost us more than we could afford at the service center if they could do it at all." "It's not a permanent solution," Jack cautioned, unwilling to oversell his work. "The weld should hold through harvest, but you'll eventually need a proper rebuild or replacement." "Getting through harvest buys us time," Emma noted pragmatically, "and that's what we needed most." As they walked back toward the farmhouse for lunch, Frank grew thoughtful. "You know, we could use extra hands for the harvest itself. With the tractor running, we've got a chance to bring in the crop before the next storm system, but we're short-handed, since we couldn't afford to hire seasonal workers this year." Jack recognized the offer for what it was, not charity, but the authentic integration of someone with useful skills into a community of mutual support. The prospect of purposeful work, decent meals, and shelter through the harvest season represented stability he hadn't experienced since before his homelessness began. "I'd be glad to help," he replied simply. "Been a long time since I was part of bringing in a harvest, but I'm a quick study with equipment." Maria greeted them on the porch, her expression shifting from anxiety to relief when Frank gave her a thumbs-up signal from the bottom step. "It's working?" she asked, needing verbal confirmation. "Running like it just came off the assembly line," Frank confirmed, his typical stoicism briefly overtaken by enthusiasm. Jax agreed to stay on through harvest, too. The news was met with an impromptu celebration over lunch. Nothing extravagant. Just an extra dessert Maria produced from the refrigerator and a sense of lightened spirits around the table. Small victories were precious commodities in the precarious world of independent farming. The afternoon was devoted to preparing for the accelerated harvest schedule. Jack familiarized himself with the operation of the combine and grain transport system, while Frank and Emma developed a field-by-field strategy to maximize efficiency. The family's determination inspired Jack. Their refusal to surrender despite overwhelming odds reminded him of the resilience he had witnessed in his fellow Marines during the most challenging deployments. That evening, after a satisfying day of productive work, Jack sat on the porch with Frank, watching twilight settle over the farm. The peaceful scene contrasted sharply with many of his recent nights spent seeking shelter under bridges or in abandoned buildings, hyper-vigilant against both natural elements and human threats. "You mind if I ask you something personal?" Frank inquired, breaking the comfortable silence. Jack tensed slightly but nodded. "Go ahead." "How does a skilled mechanic like yourself end up on the road? Man with your abilities should have been snapped up by any number of operations." The question probed directly into territory Jack usually avoided, but Frank's straightforward manner and their shared military background created an opening for honesty he rarely permitted himself. "It wasn't a single thing," Jack began, searching for words to explain a complex descent. "After my medical discharge, IED in Afghanistan messed up my knee pretty bad. I found civilian work at a manufacturing plant. Had a house, was married. Then the plant closed, production moved overseas. Tried to find similar work, but nothing. It paid enough to cover the bills." Frank nodded, understanding the economic realities all too well. "Lot of that happening. Good jobs disappearing. Nothing equivalent replacing them." "The chronic pain didn't help," Jack continued, finding an unexpected relief in articulating experiences he'd carried silently for years. Medication made it hard to focus sometimes. Nightmares disrupted sleep. Marriage couldn't survive the strain. Once the house was gone, it was just a series of steps downward, cheaper apartments, then a room in a shared house, then my truck, and finally just what I could carry on my back. The condensed narrative couldn't capture the grinding daily reality of his decline, the growing invisibility as former colleagues stopped returning calls, the bureaucratic obstacles to accessing veterans' benefits, the eventual surrender of pride that preceded accepting his first night in a shelter. But Frank seemed to understand the unspoken dimensions, perhaps seeing parallels to struggles faced by fellow veterans from his own era. "Systems broken," the older man stated simply. "Sends young people to fight, then forgets about them when they come home changed. Been that way since Vietnam, probably before." Jack appreciated the absence of pity in Frank's assessment. The matter-of-fact acknowledgement of systemic failure was more dignifying than the awkward sympathy he occasionally encountered. "Your skills didn't disappear, though," Frank observed, "still the same capable mechanic underneath whatever happened." "The work was always there when I could find it," Jack agreed. "Day labor, odd jobs, occasional repair work when someone would take a chance on a homeless vet. Just never enough to climb back out of the hole." Frank considered this, rocking slowly in his chair. "Know what I learned in Vietnam? Circumstances can strip everything away. Comfort, safety, certainty. But they can't take who you are at your core unless you surrender it voluntarily." The simple wisdom resonated with Jack's experience. Through all the losses and setbacks, he had maintained his identity as someone who fixed things, who understood the language of machines, who took pride in quality workmanship. That fundamental self-definition had survived even when external markers of success and stability had been stripped away. "You've still got plenty to offer the world," Frank continued. "Maybe what happened with our tractor isn't just luck. Maybe it's an opening to something new." Before Jack could respond, Emma appeared in the doorway. "Dad just got off the phone with the Hendersons. Their combine broke down mid-harvest, and they're in a panic with the weather changing. I mentioned we had a mechanic here and—" "Let me guess," Frank interrupted with a knowing smile. "They want to borrow him." "Practically begging," Emma confirmed. "Offered to pay whatever we're paying plus a share of their harvest." Frank turned to Jack with a raised eyebrow. "Up for another rescue mission?" The request represented an immediate validation of Frank's perspective. Jack's skills were valuable, needed, and potentially the foundation for rebuilding stability. "Happy to take a look," he agreed. "First thing tomorrow?" "They're desperate. Enough that Bill Henderson said he'd come pick you up tonight if you were willing," Emma replied. "Their entire wheat crop is at risk if they can't get back to harvesting before the rain hits tomorrow evening." Jack didn't hesitate. "I'll grab my tools." Within 30 minutes, he was in Bill Henderson's truck heading toward the neighboring farm, his tool case secure in his lap. The older farmer spoke rapidly about the combine's symptoms, painting a picture of mechanical distress that Jack's mind was already diagnosing based on the described sounds and performance issues. The Henderson farm was larger than the Whitakers' operation, but showed similar signs of financial strain. Equipment patched rather than replaced, buildings needing paint and repairs, the general aura of an operation hanging on through determination rather than prosperity. The disabled combine sat at the edge of a partially harvested wheat field, its massive frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. Bill's son, Jason, a man in his late 20s, waited beside the machine, his expression shifting from anxiety to cautious hope as Jack approached with his tool case. "You really fixed the Whitaker's tractor with a cracked engine block? Let's see what we're dealing with here before making any promises," Jack replied, already focused on the combine's engine access panels. For the next 4 hours, Jack worked under portable lights set up by the Hendersons, methodically tracing the combine's mechanical failure to its root cause. The problem proved to be less severe than the tractor repair, a damaged fuel injection system, complicated by electrical sensor failures that had triggered the machine's automatic shutdown protocols. By midnight, with both Henderson men serving as assistants and parts runners, Jack had restored the combine to working condition. The repair wasn't pretty. It involved bypassing several non-critical sensor systems and manually adjusting fuel delivery parameters, but it would allow the machine to function through the remainder of harvest season. "You're a miracle worker," Bill declared as the combine's engine rumbled back to life. "The dealership would have had us down for days waiting on parts, and we'd have lost half the crop to rain." "Just practical solutions to immediate problems," Jack responded, uncomfortable with the praise, but gratified by the successful repair. "You'll want to get this properly serviced after harvest, but it'll get you through the current crisis." Bill insisted on driving Jack back to the Whitaker farm despite the late hour, expressing profuse gratitude throughout the journey. As they pulled into the farmyard, he pressed an envelope into Jack's hand. "It's not what your skills are worth, but it's what we can afford. There's also a note in there, contact information for 3 other farms in the county that are having equipment issues. Word's already spreading about what you did for the Whitakers." Jack stared at the envelope in surprise. He hadn't expected payment beyond the promised share of harvest, and certainly hadn't anticipated referrals to other farms. The spontaneous formation of a client network represented a potential path towards stability he hadn't considered possible just days earlier. As he climbed the stairs to his room above the garage, exhausted but satisfied by the day's accomplishments, Jack realized that something fundamental had shifted in his perception of himself and his circumstances. For years, he had defined himself by what he had lost: home, marriage, career, stability. Today, he had been defined by what he could offer: specialized skills, problem-solving abilities, reliable workmanship. The following morning brought another unexpected development. Jack emerged from his room to find an unfamiliar pickup truck in the farmyard and a middle-aged man in conversation with Frank near the equipment barn. As Jack approached, Frank waved him over. "Jack, this is Roy Miller. He's got a dairy operation about 20 miles from here. Heard about your repair work from Bill Henderson." Roy extended a calloused hand. "Got 3 pieces of equipment down and can't get service scheduled until after my cows stop producing milk," he said with dry agricultural humor. "Bill says you're a mechanical genius who doesn't charge corporate rates." The straightforward request reflected the practical communication style of farming communities: direct needs stated without pretense, value recognized without corporate hierarchy. Jack shook the offered hand. "Wouldn't call myself a genius, but I might be able to help. What kind of equipment are we talking about?" "Milk storage cooling system, feed mixer, and the tractor that runs half the operation," Roy replied. "I can pay fair rates for the work, plus provide transportation, since I know you're helping with harvest here." Frank interjected before Jack could respond. "He's been working on equipment all night. At least let the man have breakfast before you drag him off to fix the entire county's machinery." Roy had the grace to look slightly abashed. Of course, no rush, just wanted to get on his schedule before everyone else does. The implication that he now had a schedule to manage struck Jack as surreal after years of day-to-day survival, without structure or planning horizons. As they walked toward the house for breakfast, Frank chuckled at his expression. "Told you your skills were valuable," the older man said. "Word travels fast in farming communities when someone can fix equipment without charging dealer rates or requiring specialized computer systems." Over breakfast, Roy explained his situation in greater detail, while Maria ensured Jack ate a hearty meal before considering another repair mission. The conversation flowed naturally, with Emma contributing questions about the specific equipment, issues, and Frank offering context about Roy's operation. "Been independent for 3 generations, Frank explained. "One of the few dairy farms that hasn't signed production contracts with the big processors. And they're trying their damnedest to put me out of business for it," Roy added. "Price manipulation, exclusive supply agreements with retailers, equipment designed to fail without proprietary service contracts, every trick in the book." The pattern was becoming increasingly familiar to Jack: corporate consolidation systematically, eliminating independent operators through mechanisms that maintained the appearance of market competition while actually constraining real choices. The same forces that had closed his manufacturing plant were steadily erasing the independent agricultural infrastructure of rural America. "I'll help with your equipment," Jack decided, "but I'm committed to helping with harvest here for at least the next week. Maybe I could come by after that." "Perfect," Roy agreed readily. "I've got temporary workarounds in place, but they won't last much longer. A week from now would be ideal." The exchange represented another step toward a structured future, making commitments, scheduling work, establishing professional relationships that extended beyond immediate crisis response. Each element reconnected Jack to the normal patterns of economic participation that homelessness had severed. After Roy departed with confirmed plans for Jack's assistance the following week, Emma approached with an idea that pushed this emerging stability even further. "You know, with all these repair requests coming in, you could probably establish a regular circuit of farms needing mechanical help. Most can't afford dealer service, but could manage reasonable rates from an independent mechanic." The suggestion outlined a potential business model that hadn't occurred to Jack: becoming an independent service provider specifically for struggling agricultural operations, filling the gap between prohibitively expensive authorized dealers and unreliable amateur repairs. "I don't have a vehicle," he pointed out, the practical obstacle immediately apparent, "or tools beyond my basic kit, or business licensing." Emma wasn't deterred. "The Henderson family has an old service truck they haven't used since their son moved to Indianapolis. Might be willing to work out a purchase arrangement. Tools could be accumulated gradually as you earn. And I helped 3 other small businesses with their paperwork and licensing. It's not as complicated as corporate interests want you to believe." The systematic dismantling of his objections revealed Emma's academic background: analytical, problem-solving applied to practical challenges. Her matter-of-fact approach treated his potential business venture not as an improbable dream, but as a logical extension of demonstrated skills and identified market needs. "Worth considering," Jack acknowledged, not committing but allowing the possibility to take root. After years of compressed horizons, where planning extended only to finding the next meal or shelter for the coming night, the idea of building something sustainable required a mental adjustment he wasn't yet certain he could manage. The day progressed with a return to harvest preparations. Jack familiarized himself with the combine operation, absorbing Frank's practical knowledge about optimal cutting heights, grain moisture monitoring, and the rhythms of efficient harvesting. The older farmer proved to be an excellent teacher, explaining not just operational procedures, but the underlying agricultural principles that informed them. By late afternoon, they had completed final equipment checks and were discussing the next day's harvest schedule when the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors cut through the ambient farm noise. All 3 looked up to see a black corporate helicopter approaching from the east, the same aircraft that had delivered Agritech representatives during Jack's tractor repair. "What do they want now?" Frank muttered, his brief good mood evaporating at the sight of the corporate transport. "Probably heard the tractors running again," Emma suggested. "They monitor equipment dealer communications, and word's been spreading about Jack's repair work." The helicopter circled once before settling into a landing pattern at the edge of the farmyard, its downdraft stirring dust and plant debris in violent swirls. As the rotors slowed, the side door slid open to reveal Diane Winters, Agritech's acquisition specialist, accompanied by a different team than her previous visit. "More pressure tactics," Frank predicted grimly as they walked to meet the corporate delegation. "Probably going to claim our equipment repairs violate some obscure terms of service." Jack instinctively began to drop back, his years of homelessness creating an automatic withdrawal from confrontation with authority figures. Emma noticed and gently touched his arm. "We're stronger with you beside us," she said quietly. "You're part of why we're still independent right now." The simple acknowledgement of his contribution, framing his mechanical assistance as meaningful resistance against corporate consolidation, drew Jack back into alignment with the Whitakers as they approached the Agritech representatives. "Mr. Whitaker," Diane Winters greeted with professional cordiality that didn't reach her eyes. "I apologize for the unscheduled visit, but I've been authorized to present a significantly enhanced acquisition offer that my superiors felt warranted immediate communication." "Still not interested in selling," Frank replied flatly. "As we've told your company repeatedly." Winters maintained her corporate smile. "I understand your position, but circumstances have evolved. We're prepared to increase our previous offer by 30%, with additional provisions for transition assistance and preferential leasing options should you wish to continue farming the property after transfer of ownership." The dramatic escalation revealed Agritech's growing concern about the Whitakers' continued independence. Jack observed the interaction with the strategic assessment skills honed during military operations. The corporation was adjusting tactics in response to unexpected resistance, deploying greater resources to achieve their objective. "What's changed?" Emma asked directly, her academic training cutting through the corporate rhetoric. "Why suddenly offer 30% more for the same property?" Winters hesitated briefly, recalibrating her approach. Market conditions are shifting rapidly. Water access is becoming increasingly valuable as climate patterns evolve. Your property's strategic location makes it particularly well-positioned for our integrated agricultural management approach. The explanation contained truth, but obscured the likely real motivation. Jack's repair work threatened to undermine a key mechanism in Agritech's acquisition strategy. Equipment failures had previously forced vulnerable farms into financial distress, creating conditions where selling became the only viable option. His ability to provide affordable alternatives potentially jeopardized this leverage throughout the region. "The answer remains no," Frank stated with quiet firmness. "This land stays in our family." Winter's professional facade cracked slightly, revealing frustration beneath. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm trying to help you secure the best possible outcome in an evolving agricultural landscape. Independent operations your size are becoming economically unsustainable. Corporate integration is inevitable. The only question is whether you benefit from the transition or become casualties of it." "Seems less inevitable than it did yesterday," Frank observed dryly, "when our unsustainable operation got its critical equipment running again without corporate assistance." The reference to Jack's repair work drew Winter's attention directly. To him, for the first time, her assessment was quick and comprehensive, taking in his worn clothing, military bearing, and the mechanical competence evident in his grease-stained hands. Something in her expression shifted, recognition of an unexpected variable in what had previously been a predictable acquisition process. "You must be the mechanic we've heard about," she stated, rather than asked. "Very impressive work on the John Deere. Our technical division suggests such repairs shouldn't be possible without specialized equipment and proprietary diagnostic systems." Jack met her gaze steadily. "Sometimes conventional wisdom about what's possible is limited by profit motives rather than technical realities." The simple observation struck at the heart of the manufactured dependencies that corporations like Agritech had created. Technical barriers designed to force reliance on authorized service providers rather than reflecting true mechanical necessities. Winter's slight flinch confirmed the accuracy of his assessment. "Well," she recovered smoothly, "innovative technical approaches are always admirable. In fact, Agritech values that kind of problem-solving capability. We're always looking for talented individuals to join our equipment services division. The compensation and benefits are quite substantial compared to independent contracting." The employment offer caught Jack off guard. A corporate recruitment attempt had been the last thing he expected when walking out to meet the Agritech representatives. The implied strategy was clear. If Jack's repair skills threatened their acquisition model, better to integrate him into their corporate structure than allow him to continue supporting independent farmers. "Thank you for the offer," he replied with deliberate neutrality, "but I'm currently focused on assisting independent agricultural operations in this region." Winters nodded as if his response was expected. "Of course, but should your situation change, the opportunity remains open." She turned back to Frank and Emma, "As does our acquisition offer, though I can't guarantee the enhanced terms will remain available indefinitely. Market conditions are fluid." As the corporate representatives returned to their helicopter, Jack noticed a man in the back of their group taking photos. Not of the Whitakers or the farmhouse, but specifically of him. The observation triggered his military threat assessment. instincts. Something about his presence and activities had elevated him from irrelevant homeless person to someone worth corporate surveillance and recruitment efforts. What none of them could know, as the black helicopter lifted off and banked eastward, was that these photos would soon reach the desk of someone with a very different perspective on Jack's mechanical innovations. Within 24 hours, a conversation would take place in a corporate boardroom 500 miles away that would dramatically alter the trajectory of both Jack's reconstruction of his life and the Whitakers' fight for agricultural independence. As evening approached and the family gathered for dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to the agritech visit and its unusual focus on Jack. "They're worried," Emma analyzed as she helped her mother set the table. "Your repair work threatens their entire acquisition strategy in this region. They've been using equipment dependencies to force sales." "Makes sense," Frank agreed. "Every farm they've acquired in the past 3 years had major equipment failures just before they surrendered. Always assumed it was just bad luck combined with financial pressure." Jack considered this pattern with growing concern. Could be more than coincidence. Military taught me to be suspicious when failure patterns benefit specific strategic interests. The possibility hung in the air that equipment failures might not be random misfortune, but deliberate components of corporate acquisition strategies. If true, it would transform the narrative from unfortunate economic evolution to something approaching coordinated predation. "Either way," Maria interjected with practical wisdom, "what matters is that we have a working tractor, a harvest to bring in, and a skilled mechanic to help us do it. Tomorrow we focus on the crop. Corporate conspiracies can wait." Her perspective reset their priorities, bringing focus back to the immediate challenges rather than larger forces beyond their control. Jack appreciated the grounding in present reality, a healthy counterbalance to the hypervigilance that his military experience and subsequent homelessness had ingrained. Later that night, as Jack prepared for sleep in his room above the garage, he found himself contemplating the dramatic shifts of the past few days. From anonymous homeless veteran to sought-after mechanic and potential agritech recruitment target represented a transformation he couldn't have imagined when seeking shelter from the storm in an abandoned barn. More significant than external recognition, however, was the internal shift in how he perceived himself and his future possibilities. For the first time in years, he was thinking beyond immediate survival, considering Emma's suggestion about establishing a regular circuit of farms requiring mechanical assistance, imagining a stable existence built around his technical skills and the authentic needs of a community under pressure. As he drifted towards sleep, Jack couldn't know that events were already in motion that would accelerate this transformation far beyond his modest imagining. The photos taken by Agritech's representative had already been transmitted to corporate headquarters, where they would soon catch the attention of someone with the power to fundamentally alter the balance of power in Crawford County's agricultural struggle. The next phase of Jack's journey was approaching with the inevitability of dawn, and like the coming harvest, it would require him to reap what had been sown through his simple act of helping a desperate farmer with a broken tractor. Morning arrived with the familiar symphony of farm life, roosters announcing dawn, equipment rumbling to life, the distant lowing of cattle in neighboring pastures. Jack awoke in the room above the garage feeling more rested than he had in months. The successful repair of the Henderson combine had stretched late into the night, but the satisfaction of returning to the Whitaker farm, with payment in his pocket and the knowledge of a job well done, had provided a deeper peace than mere physical comfort could explain. As Jack descended the wooden stairs to the farmyard below, he spotted Emma near the equipment shed, already reviewing harvest plans for the day. The afternoon before, they had run a successful test of the repaired tractor pulling the grain wagon, confirming that Jack's unconventional welding solution was holding under real working conditions. Today would begin the actual harvest, the critical period that would determine whether the Whitaker farm survived another season. "Morning," Emma called, looking up from her clipboard. "Dad's already checking the combine. Says we're starting with the north field, since it's ripened fastest." "Makes sense," Jack agreed, falling naturally into the collaborative planning. "How's the tractor sounding this morning?" "Perfect. Dad says it's running smoother than before it broke down." Her smile conveyed both gratitude and something else, a growing respect for his abilities that went beyond appreciation for the emergency repair. Breakfast was a purposeful affair, with Maria providing a hearty meal designed to fuel a day of intensive physical labor. Frank outlined the harvest strategy in precise detail, assigning roles based on experience and physical capability. Jack would operate the tractor and grain wagon, working in coordination with Frank on the combine to ensure smooth transfer of the harvested crop. "Weather report gives us 3 good days before the next system moves through," Frank concluded as they finished eating. "If we push hard, we might get everything in before the rain." The plan established, they moved with synchronized efficiency toward their assigned tasks. Jack familiarized himself with the tractor's operational controls, making minor adjustments to accommodate his height and build. The machine responded with reassuring precision, the repaired engine delivering steady power without hesitation or irregular sounds that might indicate underlying problems. As they prepared to begin the harvest, Jack noticed a pickup truck approaching the farm from the main road. "Expecting visitors?" he asked Frank, who stood nearby checking the combine's cutting heads. Frank squinted against the morning sun. "That's Roy Miller's truck. Thought he wasn't coming until next week for your help with his equipment." The dairy farmer parked near the equipment shed and hurried toward them with unexpected urgency. "Frank, been trying to call your house. Phone kept going to voicemail." "Lines were down yesterday," Frank explained. "What's got you in such a rush?" Roy's expression was a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "You haven't heard? Word's spreading all over the county. Masterson Aviation filed for bankruptcy yesterday. Their assets are being acquired by Phoenix Engineering." The names meant nothing to Jack, but Frank and Emma exchanged startled glances that suggested significant implications. Masterson was Agritech's parent company, Emma explained for Jack's benefit. They've been the driving force behind agricultural consolidation in 3 states. Phoenix Engineering is their biggest competitor. "More than competitors," Roy added. "Complete opposite business models. Masterson built their strategy around controlling farmers through equipment dependencies and resource monopolies. Phoenix focuses on empowering independent operators, open-source technology, modular equipment design, regional repair networks." Jack processed this information through the strategic framework his military training had instilled. "So the corporation pressuring your farms is suddenly vulnerable?" "More than vulnerable," Roy confirmed. "Their entire local operation is in chaos. Regional executives were called to emergency meetings in Chicago. Land acquisition contracts are on hold pending review by the new ownership." The news represented a seismic shift in the power dynamics that had been squeezing independent farmers in the region. Frank's normally stoic expression gave way to cautious optimism. "This changes the immediate pressure, but we still need to get the harvest in. Phoenix might have a different philosophy, but they're still a corporation with profit motives." "Of course," Roy acknowledged. "Just thought you'd want to know. Oh, and there's something else. Phoenix's CEO is making a regional tour to assess the acquired operations. Rumor has it he's specifically interested in meeting local farmers who've resisted Agritech's acquisition efforts." "When?" Emma asked, already calculating how this might affect their harvest schedule. "Tomorrow or the day after. Details are still emerging." Roy turned to Jack with unexpected focus. "They're also asking about you." Jack stiffened, instantly wary. Me? Why would a corporate CEO care about a homeless veteran? Apparently, Agritech sent reports about your repair techniques to headquarters as a potential threat to their equipment dependency model. Phoenix has a different perspective. They're interested in practical innovations that extend machinery lifespan without proprietary systems. The revelation that his simple mechanical solutions had attracted corporate attention at such high levels left Jack momentarily speechless. For years, he had existed beneath society's notice, invisible except to those who directly encountered him. The idea that his repair work might represent something valuable enough to merit executive interest challenged his established self-perception. "Well, they can get in line," Frank declared protectively. "Jack's helping with our harvest first. Corporate curiosity can wait." The statement reinforced Jack's integration into the Whitaker family's priorities. His skills and presence valued in immediate, practical terms rather than abstract corporate interest. The grounding effect helped stabilize his reaction to the unexpected news. "Absolutely," Roy agreed. "Just wanted to give you all a heads up. I'll leave you to your harvest." He hesitated, then added, "Though if Phoenix's CEO does show up, it might be worth hearing him out. Could represent a real shift in how corporations interact with independent farms in this region." After Roy departed, they returned to harvest. Preparations with renewed energy. The potential weakening of Agritech's grip on the region offered hope that extended beyond the current season. Possibility that the systematic pressure on family farms might ease under new corporate leadership with different priorities. The day unfolded in the rhythmic pattern of modern harvesting, the combine steadily cutting through golden fields of grain, the tractor and wagon moving alongside to receive the processed crop, trips to the storage silos to unload before returning to the fields. Jack settled into the operational role with natural competence, his mechanical intuition allowing him to anticipate the combine's needs and position the grain wagon for optimal transfer. By mid-afternoon, they had harvested nearly 40% of the North Field, significantly ahead of schedule due to the smooth coordination between equipment and operators. During a brief break for water and sandwiches brought by Maria, Frank surveyed their progress with satisfaction. "At this rate, we might get everything in before the weather turns, even with smaller crew than normal," he observed. "You handle that tractor like you were born to it, Jack." The compliment carried weight, coming from a lifelong farmer whose existence depended on intimate knowledge of agricultural equipment. "Military vehicles or farm equipment, it's all about understanding the machine's language," Jack replied. "Each one has its own personality once you learn to listen." "That philosophy would drive the corporate equipment designers crazy," Emma remarked with a smile. "They want standardized operations through computer controls, not human intuition and mechanical sympathy. Which is exactly why independent farms still outperform corporate operations acre for acre when given fair competition," Frank added. "Can't program real agricultural knowledge into computer systems. Has to be lived and learned through direct experience." The conversation highlighted the competing visions for American agriculture: corporate standardization versus human scale. Operations guided by generational knowledge and direct environmental interaction. Jack recognized parallels to military debates between technology-centered approaches and boots-on-the-ground expertise, reinforcing his natural alignment with the Whitakers' perspective. They resumed harvest operations with renewed focus, pushing to maximize the remaining daylight hours. By sunset, they had completed the North Field and begun preparation for the next day's work in the larger eastern section. As they secured the equipment for the night, the satisfaction of tangible progress provided a communal boost to morale, visible results from collaborative effort. After dinner, as Maria and Emma cleared the table, Frank retrieved an old leather, a folder from a cabinet in the living room. "Been thinking about something since Roy's visit this morning," he explained, returning to the table. "If Phoenix Engineering is really changing the corporate approach to independent farms, we might want to consider this." He opened the folder to reveal technical drawings, detailed schematics for an irrigation system specifically designed for the unique water management needs of the Whitaker property and surrounding farms. "My father developed this back in the 1970s, Frank explained as Jack examined the drawings, "designed to maximize water conservation while ensuring sustainable usage throughout the Eastern Valley. County engineers approved it, but implementation costs were beyond what individual farms could manage then." The technical quality of the drawings impressed Jack. Precision engineering applied to practical agricultural problems, creating systems that worked with natural water flow patterns rather than imposing artificial constraints. The design philosophy matched his own approach to mechanical systems, understanding and enhancing inherent functionality rather than forcing standardized solutions. "This is remarkable work," he acknowledged, recognizing the comprehensive understanding of both mechanical principles and environmental factors that informed the design. "Why hasn't it been implemented in the decades since?" Agritech's predecessor companies weren't interested in water conservation systems that empowered independent farms, Emma explained. "They've systematically blocked infrastructure projects that don't centralize resource control under corporate management." "But Phoenix might have different priorities," Frank continued. "If they're truly focused on supporting independent operations rather than absorbing them, this system would demonstrate how regional farms could collaborate on critical resource management without surrendering autonomy." The possibility represented another potential shift in the agricultural landscape, moving from defensive resistance against corporate takeover toward proactive collaborative solutions that preserved independence while addressing shared challenges. Jack recognized the strategic wisdom in Frank's thinking, reframing the conversation from individual survival to sustainable community infrastructure. "Worth presenting if the CEO actually shows up," Jack agreed, studying the irrigation designs, with growing appreciation for the Whitaker family's multi-generational commitment to sustainable agriculture. Their planning discussion was interrupted by the distinctive sound of a vehicle approaching the farmhouse. Not the familiar rumble of neighboring farmers' trucks, but the refined purr of a luxury engine. All three moved to the window, watching, as a sleek black SUV with tinted windows pulled into the farmyard and parked near the porch. "Not Agritech's usual style," Frank observed, his voice cautious but not alarmed. "Too understated." The vehicle's driver's door opened, revealing a young woman in business attire, professional but not ostentatious, lacking the aggressive corporate polish of Agritech's representatives. She approached the porch with a respectful, rather than entitled demeanor, waiting to be acknowledged rather than immediately advancing toward the door. Frank opened the front door before she could knock. "Can I help you?" "Mr. Whitaker, I'm Rebecca Chen, Executive Assistant to Daniel Reeves, CEO of Phoenix Engineering." She offered a business card as credentials. "Mr. Reeves apologizes for the unscheduled visit, but he's in the region reviewing the Masterson acquisition and specifically requested to meet with you if your schedule permitted." Frank accepted the card, studying it briefly before responding. "Bit late for business calls, isn't it?" "The meeting schedule has been extremely compressed since the acquisition announcement," she explained with genuine rather than performative apology. "Mr. Reeves is particularly interested in speaking with farmers who've maintained independence despite corporate pressure, and your farm was specifically mentioned in the transition briefings." "Mentioned how, exactly?" Frank pressed, understandably suspicious after years of Agritech's manipulative approaches. as a key water management property that previous management had failed to acquire despite sustained efforts, Rebecca replied with surprising candor. And more recently, as the site of adaptive mechanical innovations that might inform Phoenix's approach to equipment design and service models. The reference to mechanical innovations, clearly indicating Jack's repair work, confirmed Roy Miller's earlier information. Somehow, his unconventional tractor repair had escalated through corporate channels to reach the desk of a CEO managing a major acquisition. Frank glanced back at Jack, silently seeking his input on how to proceed. The situation presented both opportunity and risk, potential alliance with a more supportive corporate philosophy versus exposure to new forms of pressure they couldn't yet evaluate. Jack gave a slight nod, his military assessment suggesting that gathering intelligence directly from the new corporate leadership would be valuable regardless of their ultimate intentions. Frank turned back to Rebecca. "We could spare a few minutes. Where is Mr. Reeves?" "In the car, reviewing briefing materials. He didn't want to impose by approaching directly in case the timing was inconvenient." The consideration represented a striking departure from Agritech's presumptuous approach, perhaps indicating the philosophical differences Roy had described. Frank nodded toward the vehicle. "Invite him in, then. We've got coffee on if he's interested." Rebecca returned to the SUV, leaning in to speak briefly with the occupant. A moment later, the rear door opened, and a man in his late 40s emerged. His attire was business casual rather than formal corporate. Quality materials, but practical styling, more appropriate for farm visits than boardroom posturing. Most striking was his movement as he approached the house, the distinctive gait of someone compensating for a prosthetic limb, partially concealed by well-tailored pants, but evident to Jack's experienced eye. As the CEO climbed the porch steps, Jack noticed other subtle indicators of military background: the balanced posture, economy of movement, and environmental awareness characteristic of combat veterans. The realization created an unexpected sense of connection before any words were exchanged. "Mr. Whitaker," the man greeted, extending his hand. "Daniel Reeves, thank you for accommodating an unplanned visit." "Frank Whitaker," Frank replied, shaking the offered hand before gesturing inside. "This is my daughter Emma, who manages our business operations, and Jack Matthews, who's helping with our harvest." Daniel Reeves entered the farmhouse with the respectful demeanor of someone conscious of intruding on private space. His gaze swept the room with quick assessment before settling on Jack with sudden, focused interest. "Jack Matthews," he repeated, his expression shifting to one of profound recognition. "Staff Sergeant Matthews, 1st Marine Division, 3rd Battalion, Combat Logistics." The detailed identification of his military unit caught Jack completely off guard. "How could you possibly know that?" A smile transformed Reeves's professional demeanor to something more personal. "Because I was Captain Reeves, 2nd Battalion, during Operation Enduring Freedom. You rebuilt our entire convoy's transmission systems after an IED took out our supply lines in Helmand Province. 2009. The memory crashed through Jack's consciousness, a desperate 72-hour repair operation in blistering heat, salvaging components from damaged vehicles to keep the remaining transport operational during a period of intense combat activity. He hadn't connected the Phoenix CEO's name with the young Marine captain who had authorized his unconventional repair approach over the objections of supply chain command. "That was you," Jack managed, the coincidence seeming impossible. "It was indeed," Reeves confirmed. "Your mechanical innovation saved our entire operation and quite possibly my life, since I was evacuated in one of those vehicles after losing my leg 2 weeks later." He gestured briefly toward his prosthetic. "Never had the chance to thank you properly before we were deployed to different regions." The revelation transformed the corporate visit into something entirely unexpected, a reunion of military connection across the civilian divide that had separated their post-service paths. While Jack had descended into homelessness despite his technical skills, Reeves had evidently channeled his military leadership experience into corporate success. Jack struggled to find appropriate words for the extraordinary coincidence. Statistically improbable, Emma supplied, her academic background emerging in her assessment of the situation. Divine intervention, Maria suggested, more softly from where she stood near the kitchen doorway. Remarkable timing, Reeves acknowledged, addressing the entire family but maintaining focus on Jack. When our acquisition team forwarded reports about innovative mechanical repairs happening on farms resisting agritech pressure, I never imagined I'd find the same Marine who taught me that official supply chains and authorized repair procedures should never be the limiting factor in accomplishing critical objectives. The personal connection created an immediate shift in the atmosphere, from cautious evaluation of corporate intentions to the recognition of shared experience and values. Frank gestured toward the kitchen table. Maybe we should sit down. Seems there's more to discuss than we realized. As they settled around the table with coffee provided by Maria, Reeves explained the circumstances that had brought him to the Whitaker farm. Phoenix Engineering has been developing agricultural technology based on an entirely different philosophy than Masterson's Agritech division, he outlined, where they focused on creating dependency through proprietary systems and centralized control. We've built our approach around empowering independent operators through open-source technology, modular design, and distributed repair networks. The opposite of planned obsolescence, Emma observed. Exactly, Reeves confirmed. We believe the future of American agriculture lies in fortifying independent operations with appropriate technology, not replacing them with corporate management. Structures disconnected from local conditions and generational knowledge. The vision aligned remarkably with the Whitakers' own perspective, though years of corporate pressure had trained them to be skeptical of such claims. Frank voiced this caution directly. Admirable philosophy, but why would a corporation voluntarily limit its control and profit potential? Reeves nodded, acknowledging the legitimate question. First, because distributed resilience is ultimately more sustainable than centralized vulnerability, a lesson from military operations that applies equally to food security. Second, because ethical business models focused on long-term partnership rather than extraction actually generate superior returns over extended timeframes. His gaze returned to Jack. And third, because some of us came home from war with a clearer understanding of what truly matters in creating systems that serve human flourishing rather than merely generating quarterly profits. The statement carried the weight of shared experience, the perspective shift that combat deployment often created, reprioritizing values away from conventional success metrics toward more fundamental assessments of meaningful contribution. When the opportunity to acquire Masterson's agricultural division emerged, we moved quickly, Reeves continued. Their financial overextension created an opening to fundamentally reshape the corporate approach to farming communities like yours. But we need practical partnerships with independent operators to demonstrate viable alternatives to their consolidation model. The candid presentation of both philosophy and strategic objectives contrasted sharply with the manipulative approaches the Whitakers had experienced from agritech representatives. Frank considered this information carefully before responding. We've developed some ideas along those lines ourselves, he said, reaching for the irrigation system designs he had shown Jack earlier. My father designed this regional water management approach decades ago, but it needed cooperation that corporate interests weren't willing to support. Reeves examined the technical drawings with genuine interest, asking specific questions about flow rates, seasonal adaptations, and maintenance requirements that revealed authentic engineering knowledge rather than performative engagement. His questions expanded to include Emma's academic research on sustainable agricultural economics and Frank's practical experience with equipment adaptation for specific local conditions. Throughout this exchange, Jack observed the interaction with growing appreciation for Reeves' approach. The CEO was gathering information in a collaborative rather than extractive manner, recognizing the expertise present in the farmhouse rather than imposing corporate perspectives as inherently superior. After nearly an hour of substantive discussion, Reeves turned his focus directly to Jack. "Staff Sergeant Matthews, I'd like to speak with you specifically about your mechanical innovations. Our preliminary reports suggest you've developed repair techniques that fundamentally challenge the equipment dependency model agritech has used to pressure independent farms." Jack shifted uncomfortably at the corporate attention. "I just fixed a tractor using methods I learned in the Marines. Nothing revolutionary about working with available resources when replacement parts aren't practical." That perspective itself is revolutionary in modern agricultural equipment design, Reeves countered. The entire industry has moved toward black box systems that intentionally prevent operator maintenance and independent repair. Your techniques represent exactly the kind of practical innovation Phoenix wants to incorporate into our next generation of equipment design. The conversation had developed far beyond anything Jack could have anticipated when a homeless veteran seeking shelter from a storm had stopped to help a farmer with a broken tractor. The suggestion that his improvised repairs might influence corporate equipment design seemed almost absurd given his current circumstances. "I'm just trying to help the Whitakers get their harvest in," he said, attempting to redirect focus away from himself. Reeves studied him with the perceptive assessment of a former combat officer. "Your current focus is admirable, but I'd like to discuss a longer-term proposition when you have time. Phoenix is establishing a field innovation division specifically, focused on developing equipment that can be maintained and modified by operators without specialized diagnostic systems or proprietary parts. We need people with exactly your skills and perspective to lead that initiative." The implied job offer at corporate leadership level created a moment of cognitive dissonance for Jack. After years of struggling to secure even entry-level employment, the suggestion that his mechanical approach might qualify him for an executive position seemed disconnected from his reality. Frank, sensing Jack's discomfort, smoothly redirected the conversation. "That sounds like a discussion for after harvest. Right now, we're focused on getting our crop in before the weather turns." Reeves acknowledged this priority with immediate respect. Of course, agricultural timing waits for no one, especially corporate interests. He rose from his chair, signaling the conclusion of the impromptu meeting. "I've already taken more of your evening than intended, but I'd like to continue this conversation about both the irrigation system and mechanical innovations when your harvest is complete." As the visit concluded and Reeves prepared to depart, he paused on the porch to speak privately with Jack. "Whether or not you're interested in a formal position, Staff Sergeant, I owe you a debt from Afghanistan that I'd like to repay. The least I can do is ensure your innovations get the recognition and application they deserve." Jack met his former captain's gaze directly. "Appreciate the sentiment, sir, but I wasn't looking for recognition. Just trying to help people who've shown me kindness." "That's exactly why your perspective is so valuable," Reeves replied. "In both military and civilian contexts, the most effective problem solvers are motivated by practical outcomes rather than institutional rewards." He extended a business card with direct contact information. "Oh, when you're ready to discuss possibilities, call me directly. no corporate gatekeepers or HR processes. As the black SUV departed down the gravel drive, Jack stood with the Whitakers on the porch, all of them processing the extraordinary turn of events that had brought a corporate CEO to their farm, specifically seeking cooperation rather than acquisition. "Well," Frank said finally, breaking the contemplative silence, "that was not what I expected from a corporate visit. Phoenix really does seem fundamentally different from agritech," Emma observed. "The interest in Dad's irrigation design was genuine, not performative." Maria's assessment was more direct. "That man recognized your worth immediately," she told Jack. "Saw through the circumstances to the person underneath." The validation stirred complex emotions for Jack. Appreciation for the recognition of his skills mixed with uncertainty about reintegrating into formal employment structures after years of independence, born of necessity. The potential transformation from homeless veteran to corporate division leader represented a journey he had not imagined possible when seeking shelter from the storm just days earlier. "Let's focus on getting the harvest in," he suggested, defaulting to the immediate practical priority that had grounded him throughout his homeless years. "Plenty of time to consider corporate offers afterward." Frank nodded approvingly. "One day at a time. That's how farms survive, and people too." As they returned inside to prepare for the next day's harvesting, Jack found himself contemplating the extraordinary chain of events that had unfolded from his simple decision to help with a broken tractor. The path forward remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, uncertainty carried the promise of possibility rather than threat. What none of them could anticipate was that the following morning would bring yet another unexpected development: the arrival of Daniel Reeves, a private jet at the small regional airport, carrying not just the Phoenix CEO, but a team of engineers and agricultural specialists ready to transform the Whitaker farm from struggling independent operation to showcase demonstration site for a new model of corporate agricultural partnership. The homeless veteran who had arrived seeking temporary shelter would soon find himself at the center of a fundamental reimagining of American agricultural systems, his practical innovations and combat-tested resilience providing the essential bridge between corporate resources and farming community needs. The broken tractor that had initially drawn him to the Whitaker farm would prove to be not merely a mechanical challenge, but the catalyst for rebuilding his life while helping preserve the independence of an entire farming community. As Jack climbed the stairs to his room above the garage, the weight of homelessness that had pressed upon him for 4 years felt slightly lighter, not yet lifted, but shifting towards something that resembled hope. Tomorrow would bring another day of harvest, honest work alongside people who valued his contribution, and perhaps the first steps toward a future where his skills and experience found their proper place in a world that had previously failed to recognize their worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.